Morning, everyone. I'm John Van Dyke. I'm Drupal user number 2375, and I've been involved with Drupal since 2003, I believe. I just checked my user profile last night, and it was 15 years, 4 months. So way back then, I was looking for somebody to work with me, and I had a lot of applications that said something like, my objective is to get a high-paying job to do computer science. And then I got one application that was a 2-page letter that said, basically, I want to change the world, and here's what's important to me, and this is my direction. And actually, they didn't have a major for me at the university that fit what I wanted to do, so I kind of put together my own program. And I was like, wow, I got to meet this guy. So the next few years, Matt Westgate and I worked together. And we had no idea about Drupal. We were using stone tools back then. And we tried Java for a bit. That was a disaster. We tried some other things. And if you've read Matt's little blurb about his talk this morning, you'll notice that he is user number 2275, which is 100 users before me. That's because while we were researching things, it was Matt who found Drupal and said, you know, this really aligns well with what we're trying to build here. And so we said, okay, we're all in. After that, in the next year, we put together an international Drupal conference, and later we collaborated on Pro Drupal development, which was the first documentation on the Drupal core that explained why things were going on and then how you could use Drupal to leverage things. So out of that, Matt started his company, Lullabot, and last year he was recognized as one of the best CEOs in the United States. So this is a case of a humble Iowan going out and really changing the world. Everyone, Matt Westgate.
Hi, everybody. Big thanks to the organizers for all their hard work and effort. This is definitely one of the most organized camps that I've been to. So just a round of applause and appreciation. Thank you. Right before I was going to start my talk, I just mentioned it, Anne, in passing. I don't remember what we were talking about, but she was talking about there was a Drupal logo with a heart around it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of similar to like the Drupal song. And she said, what's the Drupal song? So I had to put some slides together for that. A little bit about me. John shared most of the information. Started Lullabot with Jeff Robbins way back when. And then we have a small portfolio of companies. People use Drupalize Me for learning how to build websites. Cool. Yeah, Addison Berry runs that company. She's a CEO of Drupalize Me, but it started in Lullabot and then went off to be its own thing. And we've got a company, Tugboat, that I talked about yesterday that builds on-demand staging environments for DevOps-related things. So this story begins with rock and roll.
To build a web application, you gotta download Drupal. Drupal, 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 Drupal. If you've got a website, you need a system to manage your content. Drupal. If you want to build a web application, you've gotta download Drupal. Drupal, 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 Drupal. Drupal, 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 Drupal.
I think you get the idea. That's
CDs available at track.
Yeah, I'll be signing. No, it's not me. That was my business partner in 2007, Jeff Robbins. He before he did Lullabot, he was in a rock band called Orbit, and he did the whole Lollapalooza tour and everything. And he said, you know what Drupal needs? It needs a jingle. And so he gave it one. All right. Let's see if I can go to the next slide here. All right. So I admit my talk feels a little bit like a soap opera. And so I said, well, what if it was? And so it would go a little something like this. All right. So every good telenovela begins with some baby being switched at birth. So on the night, the eve of Y2K, there's a glitch that happens, and there's Drupal is switched with an unknown CMS. We've got an MD5 checksum, we thought. Such an event would surely be impossible, we thought. So while restoring old medical records, Matt Westgate discovers an off-by-one error in the source code on the night of the Y2K. He decides to tell the world the truth about Drupal. It's been Joomla all along. Dun, dun, dun. After 3 seasons, 1 Christmas special, and a binary coloring book for children, Joomla is released on October 31st, and the identity of the source code is restored. Thanks to Marissa Epstein for making the Dracula Drupal icon. This is the talk that'd be fun to hear, wouldn't it? It'd certainly be entertaining. We'd have actors, cheesy music, Drupal product placement, and the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, this is the talk you're going to get today. So, while not quite as sensational, my actual talk is divided into 3 sections, sort of covering the 15 years of Drupal. It's going to be more stories than it is code, but I hope you'll enjoy it, and we'll have some laughs together this morning. So as we go into these 3 parts, you're going to see some values pop up from time to time, and it's good to know the values behind the stories, and I think they go a long way to sharing why I'm part of this community with you. Be human, collaborate openly, have fun, kick ass. Now, I don't normally like to swear in presentations, so I apologize for that, but maybe we can be creative for a moment. You see, my wife is originally from Spain, and she, at the time, was still getting used to all the idioms that we have here in the United States. And one time on our date, I said, oh man, I was like 2009, we were just doing the Grammys website, and I just said, I've been working my ass off. And she didn't think too much of it, and she thought, that's weird that he's referencing a donkey right now. I don't understand that. But she would always try to sort of like reflect those things back to me a week later and so on and so forth. And so I picked her up one night, and we were going to see a movie or something, and she said, man, I've been working my ass. So I can get away with this. I just blew my chance of being this guy on the last slide, didn't I? I'm not an expert in relationships or community dynamics or anything like that, but hopefully I've got some good stories to tell, and I hope you can find a way to share your stories with the community as well. If we meet, I would love to hear why you're part of the Drupal community and for you to share those stories with each other too. It's a really important part of Drupal for many of us that are here beyond the code. I had represented this slide with a circle and a slash through it, but I immediately felt horrible for crossing out Mr. Rogers afterwards, and so I put the not me on there instead. All right, let's dive in. Welcome to my internet. This was my first internet, right here. This is the World Book Encyclopedias. A door-to-door salesman came to our house, convinced my dad that he needed this for his child's education, and lo and behold, I got an encyclopedia set for me. I devoured these books. There was actually, I see some guys, yep, been there. Yeah, it's okay to admit that here. You're amongst friends. They had this crazy subscription model to it where every year they would send you like this year in review book, and I was so excited to get it. This is like the 1980s era. Don't get your hopes up for me that I was the kid that read encyclopedias, because like I barely made it through high school, so take it with a grain of salt. One day though, my dad came home with a computer, and these books, these encyclopedias, started to get a little dusty. A computer, I couldn't believe it. It was this thing called an Acer Aspire, and I didn't really know what it was, but I was just happy that it had the latest and greatest operating system, Windows 95. More importantly, though, it had a 56K modem. I was ready to dial up and drop some knowledge on my brain. When we got the computer, here's what my new encyclopedia looked like. I couldn't wait to come home from school and wait for internet pages to load. That screeching white noise hiss of the modem connecting was the sound of freedom to me. Or if you were my parents, it was the sound of not being able to use the phone the rest of the night. You see, the internet that I grew up with was goofy and relatively safe. It was full of really cheesy clip art of under construction icons for your Sisyphusian website that never was quite done. It was the internet of changing cursor icons and cursor tails. We even had ways of moving text around on the page. Hashtag bring back the marquee. Then one day, I asked a meta-level question that changed my life forever. I was too afraid to ask my parents this question, but I turned my faith to Yahoo instead. And with a single click on the home page of yahoo.com, I chose from the dialog menu, View Source, and fell deep into the matrix of the internet. Here's what it looks like when you get there. This blew my mind. You have to understand, I didn't come from a computer background. I had never seen computer code before. My first thought was, my dad is going to kill me because I just broke the computer. My second thought was, whoa, this is kind of like the movie Hackers. And I thought, oh no, now Yahoo's going to kill me for hacking the website. I thought I had done something really, really bad. Somewhere between all of this obfuscation and spacer gifts, I began to understand that this was just the client-side output of the Yahoo homepage. I didn't break the computer, I didn't hack the servers, but man, I really wanted to understand what was going on with all this code. I actually thought to myself, if Chris Perillo from Locker Gnome can figure this out, surely I can. So with a little more research, I ended up here on Joe Barda's website. Does anybody know this website? All right, just curious. The funny thing is I didn't even go back to archive.org to get this. This page literally still looks like that. If anybody tells you table-based layout is dead, I give you Exhibit A. Joe Barda, his website, he taught me how to build websites for free. And his gift was my start in my web development career. So I decided to do what Joe did. He would actually have you spin up Notepad on your Windows machine and start teaching you HTML. But I started teaching HTML classes after I learned from him. I went to my local libraries, the one in Huxley, the one in Ames, and I just said, hey, I'm a kid, I know HTML, I want to teach it, can I use your computers? And they said, sure. And I had people of all ages and all experiences attend, and I really, really loved it. Some days I taught people HTML. Some days I taught people what to do when your mouse reaches the end of the mouse pad and you want to keep using it. And that was totally okay, because my religious zeal of the internet and computers was strong, and I knew if my students just stuck with it, that there was a treasure on the other side. This is all about around the year 2000, where something else besides the Y2K scare happened. This was a really big deal for me. Does anybody remember this moment have an impact on them? Yeah, some of you. Before this, this was my bridge into the open source world. I didn't have money for Microsoft Access or Visual Basic or anything like that. I didn't know what a Linux machine was, or let alone how to pronounce it. And so all around this time, these programs became available for Windows. I downloaded and installed the packages, ran upstairs shouting to my parents, a server, I downloaded a server, which of course freaked my dad out because most times he just wanted to come downstairs and play solitaire without having to see a blue screen of death. And they asked, what's a server? And I quickly responded, I don't know, but I really think we need one. After a while, though, it was time to head to college. Oh, and of course, start a web design company. I don't want to stay on this page too long, because the more that you look at it, the more my reputation will fade. But while at Iowa State University, I did like any proactive animal ecology major would do and built my own CMS. WYSIWYG functionality had just come out for Internet Explorer at the time, so I wrapped a database-driven CMS around the Internet Explorer editing interface, and I received a small amount of work. As time went on, though, I was a developer of one, and I spent more time fixing bugs than adding new features, and I knew of open source, but I didn't know how to do open source, and I was lonely, and I started to resent the software that I made. I went back to my good friend Yahoo and asked for help, and Yahoo took me here. Does anybody remember Drupal.org looking like this? So, there was so much that I didn't understand about this site. Drupal? Drupal? To me, that looks like a scary alien floating head. I would not wrap PAL around that icon. Community plumbing? The tagline? I thought I was looking for a content management system, not some sort of service project for public restrooms.
Series tubes.
I closed my browser and I went back to my own code and thought maybe it's not such a bad place at all, not such a bad place after all. You know what happens at this point, though. Eventually, I returned to Drupal.org because, in fairness to Drupal, I didn't even try the code. And the more I read about the node system and its architecture, the more I wanted to check it out. So I downloaded the source code and I found this. It's a little bit cut off. This was taken out of the node module in the early days. And as a non-computer programmer, this code took me deeper into the matrix. For the sake of brevity, I didn't show all the comments here, but it was the first project where I found detailed documentation combined with elegant architecture. The Drupal community had essentially made a modular architecture leveraging PHP's variable function ability. That is, a variable can become a function call when you wrap parentheses around it. You can see that, like right here. And so it was a really cool pattern for me because this was basically saying, hey, all the modules that are installed right now, I'm looking for a certain function name in those modules, and if I find it, let's call it. And that kind of just blew my mind. And I thought, clearly, these are smart people. So I proceeded to print out Drupal's source code on my inefficient inkjet printer and go to town. Maybe back then it was 20 pages. I do not do that now. But this was the moment that I did fall in love with Drupal the code. You know that feeling you get when you read a poem, how it transports you to another time and place beyond the limitations of prose, where words dance like images against the backdrop of your mind? That's what happened when I read Drupal's source code. It was everything I had wanted to be in a programmer. I knew I could learn from this community, and maybe if I understood enough, I could participate. And this was sort of the highlight for me. In 2003, I started contributing to Drupal. It was basically 30 or so people emailing CVS patches back and forth to each other at the time. We used IRC and coded underneath the light of our torches, wiping the cheese dust of Doritos away from our loincloths. A personal highlight for me was becoming the maintainer of Path module in Drupal core. It was the Drupal 4.5 release. This is the maintainer's text file that shipped with Drupal at the time, and I got to add my name to it at the bottom there. I felt really proud and recognized by the community. Meanwhile, at university, I showed all of my animal ecology friends Drupal and how amazing it was, and realized by the reaction that I should probably change majors into something more computery. So just as I finished my computer degree program, I met this guy. Yeah, it's my turn, John. That's Dr. John Van Dyke. He's an adjunct assistant professor and senior systems analyst at Iowa State University within the entomology department. Let that sink in for a moment. He's a computer geek who fixes computer bugs for the advancement of real bugs. Truly, John is on a chosen path. Like John said, I met him when he was looking for a job. The actual job was to be a drummer in his rock band video game group because John was lead guitar. No, it was the open source project that John was talking about. But John took all my passions for technology and teaching and amplified them like any good mentor would do. His accomplishments are many, but I just want to highlight a few. He decided to write the book about Drupal. I followed his lead on that, and like John was saying, many developers credit that book as their safe entry point into understanding the inner workings of Drupal. He made the first ever Drupal conference happen in 2005. He did that. His reasoning was simple. Hey, we've been doing this for a while. We've never met the people in the community before. We should do that. One thing to understand about me at the time, I had never even been on an airplane before, and before you know it, we're going to Antwerp, Belgium. And if John really wants to get back at me for putting this photo here, he can tell you the story about the time he was waiting for me in the lobby of the hotel and I got stuck on the stairs. In my defense, who had ever heard of a floor 0? John was also instrumental in the underpinnings of the Drupal's content construction kit and the metadata-driven approach to node architecture. Later on in Drupal 7, this becomes fields and core. He authored actions and workflow module and many other things. I'm thankful I've had such a kind, quick-witted, inspiring mentor at the right time in my life. Thank you, John. So Drupal was blossoming at this point, and I had an opportunity to start a new company. You're never going to unsee that nose again in the logo. I met Jeff Robbins at the end of 2005. I met him within the Drupal community. That's how we actually connected. I had written the e-commerce package for Drupal, and he needed some help on it. And we met in the forums. And we decided to start Lullabot so we could keep telling the world about Drupal and hire our friends at the same time. We were motivated by evangelism and education, but the logo needed some work. So we came up with another one. Didn't work. We kind of strayed further from the mark. And then we finally got there later on, when we hired designers. There were so many reasons why Lullabot wouldn't work. Drupal wasn't being used on big websites. Most people hadn't heard of Drupal, and it made zero sense for me to walk away from an amazing salaried university job. But I know I'd regret the decision if I didn't try. Do you know that 10-10-10 rule? Like when you have a hard decision to make, you think, how will I feel about it 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, 10 months from now, and then 10 years from now. And you can kind of use that as a gauge to help really decide how you feel about making a decision. I needed that rule at that time. So we were having the time of our lives. We were traveling all over the world, teaching people about Drupal. We started to do it with Drupal conference. We were just having a great time. We were building some really big Drupal websites, but then I ran into a season of disillusionment about a year after Lullabot started. It began, for better or for worse, with the announcement of Acquia. When Dries announced Acquia, to begin with, it was a rushed decision. He was planning on being intentional about the formation of his company and the release, but some marketing or some journalistic group caught wind of what was going on and gave Dries like 24 hours to announce it before they were going to announce it. So the whole thing was rushed. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And up until the announcement of Dries's new company, Drupal was pretty much a cottage industry. And on one hand, what incredible commitment that Dries had to launch a business to support Drupal. That was reassuring. But to many of us within the community, we needed some time to adjust to what kind of felt like the first commercial factory on Drupal Island. It was a big, scary unknown. Will Acquia make a closed source version of Drupal where there'll be any work left for us? Will it still be fun to work on something when Drupal has a large commercial interest? And listen, I'm responsible for spreading my own fear and uncertainty and doubt about Acquia at the beginning within the community, and I'm sorry I did that. The truth was I was reactive and scared, and I didn't want anything to change. I wanted to be a better beacon of support within the community during this time, and undeservedly, it was also the community that got me through my own fear and uncertainty and doubt, and I have a debt of gratitude for that. In hindsight, though, any healthy ecosystem needs a sustainable model, and Dries felt like this was the best future for Drupal. The truth is, it was probably the best outcome for Drupal. If Dries didn't fill the space of creating a utility-type company for the platform, it probably would have been filled by a much larger entity that would most likely be disinterested in our community. Dries holds that light for us. The passage of time provides the greatest insights of all, and the good news is that we, the community, and Acquia have learned to coexist and usually peacefully coexist together. I'll share more of my lessons from this experience in the third part of my talk. So Drupal changed my life. It gave me opportunity that was otherwise not available to me. Along with this incredible opportunity came the classic superhero complex. Drupal saved me, now I need to use Drupal to save the world. Because if it works for me, it can work for anyone in these 3 easy steps. And step 2 may surprise you. I read too much BuzzFeed. Have you ever been that passionate about a project or a cause? So much so that you give all of you and more to the cause? It's not an uncommon feeling, actually. There's been plenty of studies about it. However, it can become an unhealthy commitment. And since a large part of Drupal is fueled by community contributions, it's easy to get burned out. I essentially felt like I gave my life to Drupal, and Drupal became my life. It wasn't bad, but it became all that I had. And other parts of my life began to disappear. In other words, it's not what you say, it's what you do that matters. Or as I was once told, you vote with your feet. The last 8 years has seen the advancements of JavaScript and microservices architectures. Many people feel like this poses a serious threat to Drupal and other monolithic CMS platforms. That JavaScript has set a new bar for the level of responsiveness and experience in modern web applications, right? You click, it's immediate. All the stuff is happening in the background. It was also an indicator that the honeymoon phase of Drupal was over after Drupal 7. That was released in 2011. It's not going to be everything to everyone. That's what Drupal 7, that's what after the development of Drupal 7 started to signify to me. And I do believe it's getting harder for the hobbyists to justify using Drupal for their one-off sites. Nobody likes to talk about this, but Drupal's place has become, in my opinion, large-scale digital experiences. And that can be alienating to those of us that have grown up with Drupal. All of this worry and stress and overcommitment had worn me out, taken my toll on my relationships with my friends, my families, my employees. So I got away for a bit. I sold all my stuff and I hung out at a Zen monastery for a while, as you do. This is not the monastery that I went to. Also, it looks like that woman's about to receive a very painful flu shot. Not peaceful. I was exhausted for a myriad of reasons and needed to let go, to be free. I did a lot of really interesting and introspective exercises while at the Zen Center. I'd love to tell you about those sometimes, but maybe I can just share one relevant experience. A particularly powerful moment for me was where I was guided to hold the suffering of the world. All of it. To breathe it in, to hold it, the suffering that I was feeling of my friends, my family, my community, my city, my state, my country, the world. To breathe in, hold that suffering, and exhale thoughts of loving kindness and compassion. It's actually a Tibetan practice called Tonglen. The purpose isn't to heal them or anybody, but to relate to them, to connect on a level of humanity. This exercise was a cogent reminder for me that the very act of running from our own suffering is actually the one suffering we can avoid. one less ounce of suffering in the world to endure. That moment brought an intimacy to my life that was sorely needed. We're human beings going through the same overall ups and downs, and it generated compassion and goodwill and a desire to do good in the world. Many wise people have said in various ways that giving to others in life is a source of the greatest contentment and satisfaction. It's no wonder that altruism is a core virtue within most of the world's traditions. My experience in the temple, not that one, gave me a gratitude that left me a steaming mess of snot and tears and joy for weeks. It was really difficult to describe having your chest blown open with love and then seamlessly acclimate back into everyday life. But I needed it. And I bet many of you have had your own profound moments of insights, and I hope you'll share them with us sometime. Remember, Drupal is more than source code. For many of us, it's the people that keep us here too. I left that temple knowing that in my own life, the sum was greater than the whole. The sum was greater than the parts, and that relationships mattered to me more than anything else. And I wanted to go back to living and to relating. So this is what I learned. Acquia didn't go away in the time that I was gone, but my attitude had changed. The truth is, an entity like Acquia ended up increasing opportunity for pretty much everyone. They raised the tide for all. There were more people using Drupal, more people looking for Drupal help, and Acquia made it easier for companies to choose Drupal as their company-wide platform. It gave Drupal legitimacy at the enterprise level. In improvisational comedy, there's a rule of yes and. The idea is that you take a current improv scene, you say yes to it, and then you expand on that line of thinking. The opposite approach, no but, really just shuts down communication and ends the scene. There's this famous clip from The Office where Steve Carell is hanging out with his improv comedy group, and you can tell they're really nervous about having him participate in the sessions because he's done things before. But his thing is he always enters into the improv scene and then goes bang, 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 bang. It's like, you can't bring a gun to improv. It's not yes and. The practice of abundance is the improv equivalent of yes and for life. Yes, there are times to be skeptical and scared, but oftentimes, at least in my own head, those voices are loudest when I feel small. And sometimes we need perspective that, hey, we're all just floating on this big rock in space together, and that most of our everyday hazards of life aren't that big a deal. And sometimes we need more than perspective. Sometimes, perhaps we even need medical help for our mental health. I wanted to thank JD, if he's here, for his presentation and courage yesterday that he gave on erasing the stigma of mental health in the tech industry. The more he starts those conversations, the more of us will be set free. It's not his responsibility to do it, but it is his gift, so thanks, JD. Abundance can be a call to action. That in fact, yes, there is enough to go around, and I want to share this resource with everyone. When I was freaking out about Acquia, I forgot the one important piece of information. I realized Drupal is our community too, and I want to remain a part of that. If you found an open source CMS that can do as much as Drupal can do, I want to hear from you. We're still looking at Lullaby. I think JavaScript will influence the direction of Drupal. Just take a look at the JavaScript initiative that's happening as one of the core initiatives and how they're improving the administrative experience to make Drupal feel like a more modern front-end architecture. I think that's awesome that we've got a community team driving that core initiative forward. We also continue to see the API-first patterns. You've got things like Contenta and other patterns out there that are Gatsby.js that are driving the front ends. Drupal, I feel, if this trend continues, could be a strong contender as the open source content modeling platform for decoupled sites. We've got workflows, translations, revisions, all the things that make that a real possibility. The bottom line is I think Drupal and JavaScript will coexist more often than replacing each other. I do think, though, honestly, that other platforms have won out in the non-enterprise tiers. You have your static site generators, your Jekylls, your Hugos, your WordPress sites, and bundles of microservices architectures when your product is a web-based software and less about a system to manage your content. I don't think Drupal is everything to everyone anymore. But the truth is, Drupal is a really good content management system with nearly 17 years of development behind it. With that kind of history, it's why we have about 2,000 supported and stable Drupal 8 modules at the moment. There's simply not a better fully baked open source CMS platform, in my opinion. I encourage you with this slide, if you haven't seen Jeff Eaton's talk titled "You Matter More Than Your Cause," he gave it in Nashville 2018, and this is where a lot of this came from. Burnout, especially in communities with large volunteerism, is common. It's easy to give everything to a cause because you believe in the cause. It gives you purpose, direction, a sense of life. And if you leave, it feels like you're not just leaving the community, but you're leaving the cause too. And you're a bad person. No, of course you're not, but it feels that way. And sometimes your community won't accept that you're giving up on the cause, even if that's not the reason for leaving. In Drupal, we have that saying, right? Come for the code, stay for the community. And it really captures the spirit and intent we want to have, which is be welcoming, be open, and realize that Drupal is people too. But as safe as it is to join, we need people to know that it's also safe to leave. We literally need guidelines on how to avoid Drupal burnout. Because the truth is, this kind of cause-driven burnout is super predictable. You've seen it in activism, politics, religious groups, school groups. I've watched my friends, my employees, and to a lesser degree myself go through this burnout. In the spirit of brainstorming, here's the rough kind of guidelines I'm talking about. Don't glorify the death marches. No futons, kitchens, all-nighters, sleeping under the desk. In many instances, it's really just covering up bad planning, understaffing, poor resourcing, or terrible expectations. Don't punish boundaries when people exercise them. We all have a right to self-care, and we know best when we need to take a break. Don't make someone feel bad for saying they need time out. If you notice signs of burnout, help. Oftentimes you can see this in workaholics. The impact isn't on missed timelines or budgets. The impact is actually on them. It's their bodies, their psychological health, their families. Help them reset expectations. Take a look at the timelines. Help them with resourcing. Pause the work and have a personal check-in or just a laugh together. Be human. Do more than Drupal. Model a healthy work-life balance and boundaries. A healthy work-life balance is a bit of a cliche because it's different for every person. But be conscious about where you put your time. Ask someone how they are, or how was your weekend before you dive into agenda items. Don't make it all about Drupal all the time. People want to have fun too and bond in other ways beyond Drupal. Even when Drupal is what brings you together. It's a great way to remind each other that we're all people and not robots making software. Not most of us. It reminds us to be kind to each other. Your contribution to the world is more than what you do and more than what you make. Again, really recommend watching Jeff Eaton's talk. Life is the stuff that happens while you're waiting for the moments that never come. This is a famous quote from the TV show The Wire, and I think it's what happens to many of us as we get caught up in the pursuit of our lives. This snippet came from an article that Greg Dunlap wrote on behalf of for his feelings of the Drupal community. Sometimes we keep our goals and causes so far out of reach that we spend our lives chasing things that we actually never grab hold of. And yet every day, in every moment, we are living and making small decisions that form who we are, but really don't pay attention to them because we're chasing the bigger things. Have you ever heard of the mountains and valleys exercise? It's a values principle thing. The idea is something like this. So it's good to do it with two people, and you sit down and you have someone tell you about, you say, tell me about all the moments in your life that were sort of like the milestone marker moments, the big significant events, positive or negative. Give me 7 of them. These are the kind of moments that someone would write if they were writing a bio about you. And you have that person share the 7 to 10 stories. And you, as the listener, you're listening to the story, but then you're also writing down as best you can the values that you think were present in that moment that made it significant for them. If it was a negative experience, you're writing about the values that you perceive to be absent in that moment that are creating the negative experience. It's pretty incredible. It's a pretty incredible exercise to do. After you get the 10 or so values out on paper, you then collaborate with a person and you say, okay, which of these could you not live without? And you take that 10 and you bring it down to about 5. I love doing that exercise, but my point is, who you are isn't about who you want to be in the future. It's not about waiting for the moments that never come. Life is about the decisions you're making and have made every single day of your life to get you to now. Don't wait for the moments that never come. Drupal doesn't save the world. You change the world just by being here. That sounds like Bob Ross. Let your values drive you. Reevaluate yourself often, and don't participate in something out of obligation. You are not consumable fuel for a cause. Being a member of the Drupal community means you're here because you belong. It's a place to flourish, grow roots, and have members care about what happens to you, cheer you on when you succeed, and sometimes, in my case, commiserate when you fail and help you keep going. Do more than Drupal because you are so much more than Drupal. Thank you.